I guess we'll start with, if you can let us know what your reasons were for applying for our position and what was interesting about Morley Stanwood.
I drove here from my mom's house. It took me 35 minutes. My father grew up in Howard City, relatives that my stepson and his wife and family, they live in Chelsea, and we live, well, everybody's a Green Bay Packer fan, right? Not that that's a bad thing, but it's a lot farther from here than there. Now, my wife's family is from Ishpeming, and so no matter where we live, we're going to be a long ways from somewhere. It's a challenge to decide to leave where I'm at. It really is. It was a wonderful place, and I've been there for 10 years. My children grew up there. We are in a financial crisis that I'm not afraid of because we've cut $800,000 out of a $6.6 million budget in the last 4 years. But I think I'm at the point where I can take what I've learned and move and apply it somewhere else. And to be quite frank, the cuts that are coming are going to negatively impact education. We are to the point where we're going to make decisions that are not good for children. And I have 2 of my own. And why here? We're being very selective. I've only applied to 2 places out of 50 that have been listed so far. They're all over the place. We're doing it prayerfully, carefully.
Great. Thank you.
My turn. What have you learned about our district? And do you have some suggestions for creating a specific direction for our district based on what you know about it?
What I know comes from your websites.
Okay.
And from a few conversations, without trying to violate anything with contacting too many people, I don't want to go down that road. I've looked over the contracts, and I've looked over your budget, and you're on a slope like all of us are. And it would be very difficult to sit here this evening and give you anything specific without being able to look to my left and remember the name of the first hand I shook. I think what I can bring to your district, not that it doesn't exist, but what I would bring is the ability to get input from everybody that's here, sort through it, and try to help make the best decision. I don't come with a magic wand, and I don't come with all the answers, but I come with experience through challenges. And I think together we could pull this, just not pull it, that sounds like we're going the wrong direction, continue to move forward. And this is a very challenging time.
Sounds good. Ready to move on to the next one? Hi. Okay, what is your opinion of the superintendent to board communication, and how do you plan to implement effective communication?
Every week, with a few exceptions, I send home a Friday note to the board. Sometimes the Friday note is merely, here's some things just to be aware of, and a couple reminders of a committee meeting we have next week, along with a legislative update, equity schools caucus, newsletter. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes it is a communication of a summary of maybe a meeting that we had the previous evening, even if it's a committee meeting, maybe finance met. And in fact, this is what was prepared prior to my leaving. I have a board meeting Monday, and the finance committee met, and the note that went home in preparation to the rest of the board was, this is the direction, this is the conversation the finance committee had, and we're going to discuss this as a whole when we get together, and these are some thoughts I want you to begin to digest, because the conversation is going to be challenging, and then provide as much documentation to go with it as possible without making it something that they're like, oh my God, I got 15 pages to read, I can't do that. And we try to respect that as well, but regular communications. I don't use email with my board except for my board president. I don't want to be caught in the middle of making some type of a, gee, we've all talked about this, let's make the decision, and someone cries foul. But I do like the telephone, and board members call me probably as often or more often than I call them. And, or they stop in and just stop in.
Okay.
So,
You okay? I broke my glasses.
I noticed.
Thank you, Roger.
I hope you won.
Thank you.
Thanks. See, I'm very, very up on everything. I have to have somebody have to say it. What is your history of curricular and instructional improvement, and how would you lead our district toward in these areas?
Okay. Our district does not, I want to say a double negative on purpose, does not make AYP. We make AYP in our district. And it is not accredited to just me. It is accredited to our building principals. And it has to be accredited to them. Because as we talk about curriculum and curriculum leadership, I can set a goal through the board that says, this is where we think we're lacking, backed up by data. But the building principals, as they walk hourly, mornings, evenings around the building, and they're having just these tiny snippets of conversations with their teachers, or what I used to do was lean in the doorway and watch something for 45 seconds and move on and see the teacher later and say, that was really cool, what's it about? Provides opportunities for the teachers, almost in an intimate way, with their principals to say, this is what I'm working on. Remember we talked about this at the last department head meeting, and that ability to have a continuous conversation, a continuous flow about curriculum allows us to find gaps easier. Now, it doesn't mean we don't sit down and we take our data, whatever it is, and we begin to dissect it. And we look for gaps in assessment where we're doing fine, we've got a bubble, we're doing really well, and all of a sudden we're not doing well. Why are we not doing well? And literally calculate why this is not going well, this particular spot. Break it down, we'll pick elementary, and we break it down to the actual strand in the curriculum. It has to be that detailed today. Every strand, every day, every child is a good mantra. Because if it's not, and that's an enormous task. I mean, I know what I'm saying is huge. But if it's not that detailed, and if the leadership doesn't provide that, you won't get there. And I guess my role is to provide the opportunity, to provide the accountability. Leadership and curriculum, in my opinion, at the superintendent level, is not necessarily sitting down and breaking down the data, though I do that because our district is smaller, and there's an entire 3 of us at the administrative level with 700 kids. And so we sit down and we break it down together with help from ISD folks. But ultimately, curriculum leadership has to come from building principals supported by the board, supported by the administration. And if the building principal comes and says, we have to have this. 4 years ago, if I can expound, 4 or 5 years ago, we realized that there was a gap in our middle school math, and there was a gap in 5th grade, and we found it about halfway through the year, almost halfway through the year, and we bought a new curriculum immediately, and all of a sudden, 6th grade students who used to be at the top of the class were struggling, and the phone began to ring off the hook. My kid is failing. My kid has never failed. My kid's never got a D. They've never not passed. Must be the teacher's fault. Coincidentally, it was a new teacher. It wasn't. 5th grade students were leaving 5th grade with about 3/4 of the way through 4th grade curriculum. And so they're doing 6th grade now with about the end of 4th grade work. Now that we've pulled the curriculum where it needs to be, it isn't going to be a lot different. It made more sense than what the state's going to do, sorry, if they changed the cut scores and all of a sudden we're all doing poorly. Promise not to get onto a political bent, but it's frustrating because, but anyway, the leadership came from the building. Those teachers having conversations with the kids and the teachers and the principal saying, this is a curriculum I'd like you to take a look at. And they give it to, in our case, it was Mr. Lyons, 5th grade math, kind of our math guy in 5th grade. And he said, this is not what I'm teaching. Well, that also tells us that we haven't been spending enough time in professional development on the GLICs. We just haven't been doing grade level content expectations. Sorry, acronyms. And that was when I took over, and we've been progressing and progressing and progressing. So my leadership at this level is to provide opportunity, to hold accountability, and to provide support. Because when you make those tough decisions, it's just, we gotta ratchet it up to get where we're gonna go. The administration's gonna have to have the support of the superintendent and support of the board when it gets tough for a while.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, how would you use the current and potential district financial resources to deal with the financial crisis here in Michigan?
I had that answer, I had that answer, I wouldn't need a job. I would sell the answer. When you find yourself up against a financial hole, a cliff that you're coming to, the way you analyze your budget is you begin to look at it from, if you think of it as concentric circles with a student in the center, and what is dollars closest to the student, and then the next closest, and the next closest, and the next closest. And those are very difficult conversations, and I've had those, and we've privatized sections of our support staff. It does not mean those people are not important. It does not mean that those people's lives and families and children and incomes are not important. But I spoke at a Lions Club dinner the year we were doing that. They asked if I would come and speak, and I addressed the issue, and I addressed it this way. We're sitting in a beautiful restaurant, and we've had a lovely meal. But that's not all that happens in this building. Somebody has to plow the driveway, sweep the floor, answer the phone, and pay the electric bill, but that is not the purpose of this building. The purpose of this building is to feed people. All of the other things must be done to accomplish the purpose. Those are very hard conversations to have. But if you're into the point in today's economy where, in my district, last year, on a $6.3 million budget, I cut $400,000. I'm now $533,000 in the hole on a $5.975 million budget. It's a nightmare. There's nothing left. There's nothing left to cut. But as you continue to analyze and look at it, you have to start with the student in the center and build concentric circles out to see what's the farthest away from direct student funding, direct student learning, direct student impact. And then you work your way in. And then you get to where you begin to make decisions that are not good for students. Potentially.
Thank you.
How do you feel?
Oh, it's me next. I see you come looking, right? I'm easy. Anyways, I'd like to personally welcome you.
Thank you. And I thank you for arranging your schedules. I think it's a good deal.
Okay, what do you think is your greatest administrative personal strength, and how would it help the Morley Stanwood school system improve? I told you it'd be easy.
When I did my master's program, and we studied leadership and styles of leadership, it seems like the one that came to last was mine. And I've always considered myself to be a servant leader. And it sounds like a strange term, but I don't define it like Robert Greenleaf did. I define it as my job is to help you do your job better. And I had the same mantra as a classroom teacher, but I didn't know the terminology at the time. My job is to help a student do his job better, and his job is to learn. And as a principal, is to help the teachers do their job better. And as a superintendent, my job is to help you do your job better. Sometimes that leadership style means providing a resource. If I'm in an environment where I don't have a resource, it may be providing encouragement. It may be pulling people together and drawing from, I'm not the smartest person in this room, and neither are any of us, but together, we're a lot smarter than we are by ourselves. And I guess philosophically, that's the approach that I'm going to bring. Answering the second half of the question, how do I come here and lead this district forward? I don't know the history internally well enough to say what I think ought to be improved or changed in that respect. But I would suggest that considering the outside forces that are attacking all of our schools, even if we simply look at it from the point of view of finances, not to mention the increase in mandates, funded or unfunded, the increase in curriculum, the increase in assessment, the increase in the school improvement process for that matter. My role, my leadership style affords people the opportunity to do what they do best. That's why you hire good people. You hire good people so that they do what they do best. My elementary principal, who I'm losing in 3 weeks, is a curriculum master. That's what she does. She does everything else in her building, but district-wise, that's who we go to. My high school principal is terrific at pulling together groups. Who wouldn't sit together at a football game? And getting them to work together. And my job is providing them the opportunity to do those things. The hard part is also holding them accountable, holding your administrative team accountable, that they hold the other people accountable, that they hold their students accountable. That's what I do. Mhm.
On Monday morning, you come into the office and you have 3 complaints, one from a staff member, one from a parent, and one from a board member. How would you prioritize and respond to those 3 complaints?
I would have to know what they are for this reason. If the staff member theoretically has a principal, unless the problem is with the principal. But I'm going to suggest that it isn't. So, in regards to a person that they have that they can that they can help address their problem, there's probably an assistant principal and a principal, and probably a guidance counselor that they can go to first. Board members, and my board members don't always like this, on occasion get set aside. And they get set aside to the extent that they get a phone call at the end of the day, sometimes, because the longer you put off, let's say the concern with a parent is a teacher. I'm not going to answer that person's question because that's not my job. My job is to direct them first to the teacher, if it's about a teacher, and then to the principal if they don't get the answer that they like, and then come back to me, and I promise I'll listen to you. But the longer that person waits for a phone call from me, the more difficult the conversation is going to be that I'm going to tell them to have, because then they're going to be angry. And then I get to the, then I flip a coin between the teacher and the board member. It depends on what the problem is.
Back to me again. What is one strategy you would have for working with our district to make AYP at all levels?
Is that before or after the state budget? There are 2 philosophies, there's lots of philosophies, but there's 2 philosophies to building curriculum. One is that you begin with the end in mind and you work backwards. This is what we have to have. This is what we desire to have when we graduate a student. How are we going to get there? If you start on this end and we work our way forward, we may not get there. That's why pacing guides are important in a classroom. They go together. The philosophy of which end do you start on? Either way, if you start here or you start here, if you start here first, work your way backwards, you know how many chunks you have to divide. If you start here and work your way forward to see how much you can get through, you may get there and realize you didn't. In a classroom, in a curriculum, if you begin teaching in the fall, reviewing for the MEEP, reviewing for the MMEs in the spring, reviewing for the MEEP, and you spend an inordinate amount of time on something that has 2 questions in the MEEP test, you just lost 2 weeks of instructional time. Teachers have to know, they have to know their curriculum, which they do. You probably have amazingly wonderful staff here. But just like my staff back home, and just like when I was in a classroom, we all have what we really like at times. And we all know what we have to teach. The problem is that if you, pardon the trite expression, someone's moved the cheese on us. And what has happened is we have to look at the ultimate outcome. And if the ultimate outcome is the senior walking out the door, backed up by the Michigan Merit Exam, backed up by the Huskies, the GLICs, the MEEP test, which is going to go away and be replaced by something else, you have to know what to teach in accordance with what's going to be assessed. Then you get into the argument of, are you just teaching to the test? That's a tough one. That's a tough debate to have. And I guess the answer to an extent is yes. But as you look at the assessment in relation to the Michigan Merit Exam, they are what they are. If you're going to make AYP, you have to teach it. And that doesn't sound good coming out of the mouth of an educator. It really doesn't. This is an argument I have with myself all of the time. And I just spent 2 hours in a meeting in Lansing talking about if we could recreate education, what would it look like? And we can begin that process. But in the meantime, if we're not making AYP, and we need to bring in folks and sit down our individual departments as we build our school improvement plan, and that's where it's going to come from. We're doing that right now. Right now, we're doing our school improvement plans. And you have to break down data. Everything you do has to be data-driven. If someone comes and says it's a great book because it has because it's got the Michigan Huskies in the front of it, that doesn't mean anything. If the design of the book, the pacing guide of the book, doesn't get you to the end. We have to have, so you're going to have knowledge of your curriculum, pacing guide throughout the year so that you're not missing something or spending too much time on one thing. And you have to break down the data to see where you're lacking. You got to build that up. Very simple thing we did this year. We found out that last year, as we were going through that, we found out that graphing was a weakness on the Michigan Merit Exam. And so one of the school improvement goals for the high school was to improve that. And as I'm probably going farther outside of the question than I should, but PA 1249 and 1250 were the laws that were passed regarding evaluation of teachers and merit pay. Okay. So in our district, when we negotiated and settled how 1249 and 1250 were going to work, part of it was you're going to, at least one of your goals in your self-designed plan has to be your building school improvement goal, at least one of them. And then we didn't have a whole lot, but then we put a little bit of money towards it. We purchased some graphing calculators. We've got a couple of smart boards that has improved instruction. And that's just a little snippet. But,
Thanks.
yeah.
How can a superintendent make themselves more effective with community involvement? And do you have an example of your community leadership skills?
More effective in community involvement. That's a challenge. And it's a challenge because parents are as busy as we are. And we want community involvement. And we want parents involved. How to get them involved is often a challenge because earlier this week, when we did the district process rubric, the buildings had done theirs, pulled in members from the school improvement team at the elementary level and all the way up, and we had the 2 administrators, myself sitting there. I began the conversation with, there were 4 different folks that I contacted to try to get them involved in this conversation, in this process that we spent a day doing. And they work. They're simply, it was difficult to get them in. And as we completed the process, the elementary principal, she said, a friend of mine says that when they complete theirs, they print this off and they give it out to anybody who wants it for that matter. If they try to select it and say, would you read through this and tell me what you think? Because as you, depending on what you're doing, as you bring folks in and you start, you gotta forgive educators, we use acronyms all the time. But we know we hopefully know what they mean. And sometimes when you bring parents into certain aspects of things, they're very quiet. And I think they're quiet because they feel they're out of their comfort zone. And to tell you the truth, with school improvement, a lot of us are out of our own comfort zone. So how you bring them in, I think, begins at the elementary level. And it begins there because you can use them directly. And you should. And they should be there. But parents who come in and just read, come in and read to students. Come in and be involved. Come in and grade papers. Come in and do something that's simple and build that capacity starting there. It's very difficult, like we talked about. Do you start on this end or do you start on this end? To have a parent come in and work with a group of juniors is not what we want. It's not what they want. We want them in the building, we want them, because if they're here, they're going to see us at our best. And that's what we want. We're gonna want, word of mouth travels as fast as Facebook, it truly does. And so, to get parent involvement, I really believe you have to start at the elementary level and work your way in, and then pull into as many committees as you possibly can. We have a community relations, one last thing, committee. We have on our website a place where people can send in comments, thoughts, questions, concerns. It is used little, and when I have community relations meetings, and they're publicized, they're advertised here, we have a meeting, they're used little. I take that with the idea that things are going well right now.
Do you have the experience, working with grants? How can a district of our size maximize its grant potential?
Probably the most successful grant, we call it that we have, it's now K-8. Started out K-3, went K-5, is now K-8, is Mike Lissy. Okay, do we have Mike Lissy in this district?
Well, I don't know about here. I know we do it at different schools. I had Chip Hills doing it at the ISD, but we're working on it.
Okay, Mike Lissy and Mike Lissy Next is probably the way that you're going to want to look at, because this is what's going to help your students in reading fluency. Mike Lissy Next is reading includes comprehension, which is what the first initial part of it was missing. Grants are a challenging thing because often they are matching grants. In my district, I can't do that. I can't do that right now. As crazy as that sounds, I can't write a $200,000 grant because I can't spend $200,000 to match it. Grants are challenging depending on where you're at in regards to resources to implement them. They come with as many strings as Geppetto's puppet at times, and that makes them very difficult. I don't want to sound negative about grants because I know it's a source of revenue, but they're frustrating, and I say that candidly because I've been asked the same question in my district. Why don't we have more grants? My district doesn't qualify a lot of grants. Your district may. It may have a different free and reduced lunch count than my district does. It may have some availability that my district does not have, size, population, availability to other things that you can plug into it. But it is, I caution people, they are not the solution to the financial problems that we face. They're a Band-Aid, just like we've been receiving. I think the best grants are curriculum specific, like Mike Lissy, like Title I, like At Risk. Those really aren't grants, but I perceive them as similar, as opposed to a grant that I can use in my general fund. Those don't exist. Sorry.
It's my turn, and you can relax. So your hand doing a little of this.
You know what it is? It's caffeine.
We're really kind of easy to get along with here, so.
I know that, but you know what? I'll tell you later.
Daryl's our anti-email guy, if you hadn't figured that out.
You've done a good job.
That caught his attention right
I know,
there.
you
You're his kind of guy.
Thumbs up. In fact, there's a few people in the audience that were just a beaming too. All right, you all set?
Yes, sir.
What are your long and short-term personal and professional goals? Easy.
Easy. It is. I would like my doctorate's degree someday. I began working on it 3 years ago this fall. And I jumped in head first and completed 12 credits that fall and that winter. And by spring, I couldn't write my own name, along with some of the challenges at work, so I stepped out. But ultimately, that is a goal that I've had as far back as I can remember. When I retire from public education, I don't see myself sitting on the porch. I see myself with a different career, and I would really like to work at the university level, and I would really like to teach teachers, and I would really like to teach administrators, because I recall back, I went to college at Eastern. I was there from 85 to 89. classroom who were teaching us, who hadn't taught since the 60s. It's terrible, and it shouldn't be. I would imagine it's improved. I hope so. The teachers that are coming out today are wonderful, wonderful people, but if I had a long-term professional goal, that would be it. In fact, Northern, I heard just last month, their Ed Specialist program will be up and running again in the fall of 2012. So if it's not a cohort, and I can take a class at a time instead of 2 every semester for 3 years, I would probably do it. Short-term goals, I've set some of them aside, to be honest with you, because work is right now is all-encompassing. It really is. My short-term goals are sometimes my hobbies. I like to write, and I like to write children's stories, and I read those in our 3rd and 4th grade classrooms. And I'd like to see those published, but I can't. Right now, I have writer's block.
Nothing's published as of yet.
No, sir.
What, you said you had some other short-term ones. Come on, whip them on us. They're more personal goals. Things my wife and I would like to see with our children right now. We've pulled our kids out of some of their activities at the Y simply because of the fact that the things from work, the stress of running and back and forth, we've had to pull them out. We'd like to get them back in. My daughter finished first last year at the state of Wisconsin amongst 11-year-olds in gymnastics, and I had to pull her out of that. That's challenging, but you do what you think is best. Right.
Professionally, on some short-term goals, there's a couple of books that I need to read that are sitting on my desk. One written called One by Lance Secretary. I saw him present in Traverse City a number of years ago, and I started the book. And you got to be in the right mood to read an educational book. I've read a number of others lately, but it has not been that one. So that goal gets pushed aside when I just need to read something like. Well, I read last summer, Undaunted Courage, the Lewis and Clark story. Great read, by the way. Horrible ending, but it's a good read. Caution you if you read it.
All right. I have something you hint around the state here, and my question probably refers to some of the state's goals, but it says, do you have experience in collaborative efforts with other local districts or ISDs?
Yes. Our roundtable in Menominee County, the 4 districts, we meet monthly. We talk more frequently than that because we're all in a very difficult situation. And collaboratively, between myself and Menominee and Kearney is more than welcome, but it doesn't apply to them right now. We've created within our high school a program for moderately cognitively impaired students. We had students that were not being served, and it was a known fact. And both districts had the problem. We had students who were in the resource room for a couple hours a day, and they had one on aid. And the rest of the day, where they floated in and out of gym and art and some other classes, and it did not serve their purpose. Together, we created a program in the building, and those students are flourishing. And then we used the ARA funds to support it for the last 2 years, which are now going away, so we have to rethink that. My business manager now serves as business manager between Stevenson and Menominee. And that was an arrangement that took place last August. Menominee needed more than just accounts payable. They needed business management. And we felt that our system could afford to share that. And it saved our district 50% of her salary and benefits. It was a financial advantage to myself, and that was a plus. We've had the same conversations going north in regards to technology. The gentleman who runs the technology in my building does a wonderful job, and I think we're going to start having conversations with the district to our north, who's spending more than they need to contracting technology through a particular company, and I could probably save a quarter of Jim's expense cost and benefit them as well. So that would be more local. ISD, we simply utilize as much services as we can steal from them. We rely on them a great deal. So.
Teachers, administrators, bus drivers, food service, parapros.
PA 1249 I referenced earlier, PA 1250, though they may be repealed, there's been talk of that. See it when you, believe it when you see it. I don't know the extent that it's in place here. There are actually some districts that, well, it depends, I suppose, on when your contract expired, if you fell into the extension, that it would be in place by next fall. But it's a must. And I don't believe every single teacher has to be evaluated to the same extent every single year. But you can't have teachers that haven't been evaluated for 15 years. It's just not, it doesn't work. And I know that happens, and it can happen. I'm going to, as a superintendent, evaluate my immediate administrative staff, but part of their evaluation has to be to hold them accountable to do theirs. And if teachers are on a 3-year rotation for a full-blown evaluation, PA 1249 says that everybody every year, but it does not say to what extent. And I think that's a legitimate way of looking at it, that you can have self-designed goal and a moderate evaluation every other year, every 3rd year, so that the evaluations you're putting on your principals to do are not only reasonable, but they're tough and they're challenging and they're done well. You want, someone once said, it's better to do 12 things 1,000 times than 1,000 things 12 times. We want our evaluations to be meaningful and provide opportunity for corrective action if needed. Feedback. Congratulations and pats on the back for that matter. But so in regards to teaching staff, 1249 and 1250. In regards to support staff, which I don't know if your district is done by administration or if it's done by supervisors. Sometimes they're broken into 2 different groups. It's kind of the same thing. They simply have to be done, and it has to be a part of the process. And that's part of accountability on my end to make sure that those things are done.
Hi, Roger, you're back to me again.
Hi, Cindy.
What are some of your strategies when dealing with contract negotiations?
No matter how well negotiations go, it has a negative effect on relationships. Bar none. Because it's kind of, now I will have to say this, in the district where I'm at right now, and I think it will change this year simply for a variety of reasons, but it's probably unusually smooth. It is exceptionally informal, and it is informal because I have been here for 10 years now. I became an assistant principal, became a principal, and stepped in as the intern, and became a superintendent. And we trust each other, and we know each other. And the last 2 times, in both contracts, we have literally sat down with it and turned page by page and said, is there anything on this page that we want to talk about? And sometimes, with prior preparation, and I may say, line 13, this is something we have to look at. And if the union would say, that's really not a real big deal, let's work through it, we would solve it right then. If not, we set it aside. And we would go, and then we would finish and we saved dollars for last. But language costs dollars, depending on what your language is. And so we would work through, and we literally started with what was easiest, and we worked our way back to it. And some things, I literally would say, you know what, this isn't worth fighting over. That's okay. And they would do the same. And there was a give and a take. And it was done at the table with myself and my staff. With the teachers, the last 2 times, it didn't even actually involve the UNICEF director. When it comes to dollars, when I took over 5 years ago, negotiations had been at a stalemate for 18 months. And the superintendent left in August. And when I took over, I remember meeting with the current, at that time, the president of the union. And I said, Mike, what frightens me to take this job for the year is I have nothing different to tell you than what you've been hearing financially. He said, well, what you tell us, we're going to believe. I said, okay, because that's the story. And it is what it is. And there's nothing to hide. And I'll show you everything you have. And I think the best way to approach negotiations is going to be with transparency. And I know that word has been way overused, but it's true. It has to be transparent. Doesn't mean, now, I don't know your system here at all, maybe you use an outside negotiator, and that's not necessarily a bad idea. The attorney that I speak with through Troon, that we reference when I've asked her opinion of that, she said, it's a $6 million contract. People don't buy a $100,000 house without an attorney. So, again, I don't know what you do here, but I do know that wherever you're at, there's winners and there's losers, and that's not what you want when you're trying to build morale and build a staff. I think in today's world where we're at right now, you can't help but know there's going to be some difficult decisions. I would suggest that directions from negotiations has to come from you. It comes out of your finance committee. Your finance committee is going to say, this is my meeting Monday. These are some things that we're going to have to do. This is the board's direction on our fund equity. I have a fund equity of just shy of 10%. And if the board says we're going to try and stretch that over the next 3 years, that's my marching orders for negotiations, because I can take those numbers and crunch them and say, okay, I can cut 100,000 and I can spend 125. I have to have a 10% pay cut from everybody. That's where I'm at. And lines drawn in the sand are very difficult things, because it looks like you're not negotiating. Negotiations doesn't mean saying yes. Negotiations means you meet frequently, you meet at a regular interval, and you listen, and you talk, and you discuss.
Back to me. How would you ensure, and you talked about this a little bit, but ensuring that the budget cuts, which we all need to make, have the least impact on the classroom? And you mentioned the concentric circles, but could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. It's not a decision that I make by myself, and I don't say that because I shy away from it. The role of the board is to set policy. My role as superintendent is to, I don't like the word enforce, but implement the policy. And when it comes to decisions, we try to bring in as many stakeholders as we can when we get to difficult times like this. But I can tell you that more than likely, ultimately, I'm going to be providing you the data and probably the rationale, and it's a couple suggestions. Here's an A and a B and a C. What direction would you like to go, and begin to focus that down? Privatization has to be considered. It can't not be considered, and it's ugly. I've done it. You gather as much information as you possibly can first, and you do that by putting out an RFP. Putting out an RFP doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. It simply helps you find information, and then you take the information and begin to make discussions. I did an RFP 2 years ago for transportation. It came in $70,000 higher than what I'm doing it. But we still had to figure out how to do it differently, so we cut 2 bus routes. But the board said, but I don't want anybody picked up before 6:30. Okay, there's more marching orders. That gives us direction. I think I can cut another bus route this year. That puts us from 13 to 10 in 2 years. It's gone from 5 secretaries to 3 since August. When you get that information, if you find there's $100,000 in savings in privatization of something, and you're looking at cutting a program, you can't not consider it. Because ultimately, the restaurant is there to serve food, but somebody has to answer the phone and pay the electric bill. That's how we do it.
We have a couple extra minutes. If there's any follow-ups off the other questions here that you want to do, that'd be a good time to do. We have a couple extra. I had one. Can I jump in? Okay, let me go first, then you can jump in.
Go first.
You said in your, in number 13, about accountability. Do you have an example of maybe how to hold administrators, secretaries, somebody accountable on how that situation worked out, how it blew up or it resolved or what happened? Without names, obviously.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a number of, and I say that unfortunately because it is not a good thing. It's not pleasant. It isn't what we desire. Since I became the superintendent, actually at the interim, if I count that, now 5 years, I've released, however you want to say it nicely, 3 administrators, a non-tenured teacher and a tenured teacher. And One of them came about in a very blunt conversation in his office, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Says, I need you to tell me how this is gonna happen. Are you gonna give me your keys, or am I gonna have to make a phone call? And he left. And he admitted himself that evening to a rehab center. And he calls me every 6 months, called me last week, and says, just checking in. It's been dry for 5 years. It's a cool story. An elementary principal. When I became the superintendent, people began coming down and saying, you gotta know what's going on. This isn't working. And so I, very quietly, because the man had children in the district, began having some very, very quiet conversations. And I use the analogy that as the principal, there's always, I mean, people are in your office. And some of the folks that come in daily, 20 minutes to 8, they need 8.5 minutes, and that's what they need. And if they come in with a problem, a lot of times it is, I understand, and if I can help, just let me know, and off we go. Now, on the other hand, if teacher X comes in and says the sky is falling, you get under your desk before you look out the window. And these are the people that were coming to me saying, there's a problem. And so I began doing that and gathering data. And I kid you not, I had a pile like that on my desk. And I went in and I set it down and I said, we need to talk. This is what we need to talk about. And by the end of the conversation, he asked, when do you want my resignation? And I said, I'd like to transition at the semester. He said, I'd like to see my daughter graduate. I said, we can do that. That was that spring. And that went well. I don't know what he thinks of me, but that one went well as well. The last one that I did not go well. And it's still not going well. And that one was more challenging because the other 2 were new to the district. They came there. The last one was somebody who grew up there. That one was very ugly. But it was done because it had to be done. Teachers, it's kind of the same thing. One was non-tenured, that was much, much smoother, obviously. And you be gracious. You're gracious about it. You have to be. We have to be gracious. Administrators of all people have to care about people, even those that they're dealing with in that respect. And I had a conversation with this lady, and I said, you know, and I know that this isn't working, because we've had conversations and your principal has been in. And she began to cry. And I said, there's 2 weeks left. She goes, kids are saying things to my daughter. I said, why don't you take the next 2 weeks off? She said, I was going to ask. So she did.
He stole mine. But I have another one. I was looking through your letter. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about RTI. It looks like that's a pretty...
Is that an acronym I used and didn't explain?
No.
Okay.
No, you did.
Okay.
Just a
We know
little
what
more about it.
IEPs, we know what IEPs are.
Mhm.
IEPs for special education children. RTI is the gen ed version of IEP, except for, and it can be absolutely individualized, but it certainly can be looked at a little bit larger scope. It can be group oriented. Response to intervention says, depends how you apply it. It may say that your data says that students aren't comprehending well right now. And when in 3rd grade, when we ask them to retell what they just read, they're not getting it based on your class data. And so the response to intervention says, I'm going to change what I'm doing. On the other hand, it may be 3 students in your class, and we provide an intervention, we analyze the data again, and we respond to the data, and we relook at the intervention. And I think that's something that in education, actually I know that's something in education we do not do well. If you went to your doctor and he drew blood, he's looking at data. If he doesn't respond to the data, you're going to find a new doctor. We're not used to that type of thought process in education when it comes to looking at data and saying, this isn't working, why not? And it's amazing because so many of us in education deal with raw data as in our classes as we teach things to kids. Statistics, graphs, charts, the flow of things, cause and effect. But I don't think we take the data that we gather and do anything with it. We just get it and we stick it on a shelf. It's called the meat test. We have to do it because we have to do it. Well, I can't argue with that. But what are you gonna do with it? And we do school improvement because the state says you have to do school improvement. No, you do school, that's why you do it. You're right. But you do school improvement because it can improve things. It truly can, if it's done sincerely. Response to intervention can be district-wide, or it can be, I don't know.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else have any other questions?
I have one. I see what, you had an industrial arts background, starting out with industrial arts. Other than obviously improving yourself, what reason did you decide to get into the administrative end of things?
I had 5 jobs in 6 years as a teacher, being at the bottom of the totem pole in the late 80s and the early 90s. It just is what it is. And when I was teaching in the Nice District, National Mine Engineering Township Champion west of Marquette, that afforded me the opportunity to go to Northern and begin my doctorate. At that point, it was a master's. They didn't have a doctorate program. And I remember having a conversation even at Eastern with the dean of the department when I graduated. I said, I wanted to begin a master's program in administration. He goes, well, why don't you want to do a master's in industrial arts? I said, I have a bachelor's in industrial arts. He didn't like the answer, but he said, I wanted to expand on what I had. So I began that when I was teaching. I got laid off from Champion, and I went a year without teaching, and I was recalled to the district to a different building. I was laid off and recalled to the high school and cut to half-time, and I finished my master's and I got married. And I told my wife, I said, next year I'm going to be at half-time, or we can give this silly degree a try. And believe it or not, that's as simple as it was. And so I drove all over the state and found an administrative job.
Yes, thank you.
Any others?
So,
I actually have another one, sorry. It looked like, when you got to your current position, that the budget was kind of a mess from what I gather, and it looks like by the end of the first year, you had balanced the budget and added to the fund equity and, did some other things, but I wondered if you could give a little more detail on how you accomplished that in your first year on the job.
I had to make one of those horrible, tough decisions. I laid off the social worker who had just had a brain tumor removed the previous spring. That's horrible. That was part of the process. I'm telling you, the decisions that we make at this level are very difficult. That was, believe it or not, that was the first, because I told him, I said, we can't afford this. I mean, that's just a blunt answer. That was what happened. This is a absolutely wonderful lady. That was the first thing, and then we began looking at restructuring our bus routes. They had not, just like a teacher evaluation, they not only had teachers maybe hadn't been evaluated, but our bus routes hadn't been evaluated, and I put somebody new in place. And this guy cut 8 hours a day off of 14 bus routes. A day. The drivers thought he was nuts. I was praying he wasn't. He wasn't. It worked. You just have to begin to look at data. And I mean, the biggest chunk was our social worker, to be honest with you.
Your bus routes up there, are they a dual bus route, or do you pick everybody up at once?
Everybody at once. We have a district of 384 square miles, 1.6 kids per mile. Can't run them twice. Yeah.
You said you was running how many buses?
14 at the time. We have 11 now.
And you're down to 11.
Yeah, probably 10 by next year. Yeah. And we have actually thought of, because our support staff, another change that we made as we began to negotiate was saying, look at, as a cost savings measure, we're going to try our best not to affect the folks we have now at this time, but let's change the rules for those that are hired. So everybody who's hired from here on out, the rules change. That seems fair, to start with at least. And the rule was that, okay, they don't get insurance. Our support staff who were getting $14,000 in insurance as a bus driver, God bless them, I wouldn't want that job. But to work 3.5 hours a day, that was insane. And so that was a change we made. And we actually considered cutting the routes, laying off half the drivers, cutting the routes into double so that we would run twice with half the people, but it just financially didn't work, but it's another avenue to look at. That one didn't work. Some things do.
I have just one more, sorry.
No, that's all right. Much time.
This is your one shot at him.
They're all used to me here, so. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, it sounds like, again, when you started in your current role, that there were some fractured relationships between the unions and the administration, and maybe a little more on what those were and what you did to facilitate some improvements.
Again, I had an advantage because I had vested time there. But I guess I would suggest that even if I had been there for 5 years, I was hired the same time, the same summer as the new superintendent was that I replaced. And so we both had 5 years. And my 5 years were spent differently. I want to be very careful how I say that because the gentleman and I are friends. But we did not necessarily see eye to eye on how things maybe needed to be done. I think the biggest thing that corrected the problem was simply the fact that was to listen to people. It's as simple as that. And not just to placate, but to truly listen and be there and put off what you're doing. Schedules are great, but they never work. And and they just don't. And you have to listen to people, and you have to be out and about and open and there, and know that. I think there was an error, not error, but an error about this gentleman, that people felt that he came in with all of the answers without asking the questions, and that's probably the biggest mistake that you made. I was prepping as best I could, and I was reading some questions. What do they ask superintendents in interviews? And one of them was, what do you do in the first 100 days? Glad that wasn't there because I didn't have a good answer, but.
Now that you mention it. Somebody asked that.
But I was interviewed that fall by Kurt, the gentleman in Menominee at the Eagle Herald, and he said, what are you going to do differently? I said, I probably won't do anything specifically different. What will happen is a natural effect of change because I am just different than my predecessor. And if what I do is effective, naturally, change will happen along with it. You can't force change. It has to just happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Nobody that wants to ask a hundred day question? No?
It's not on
I
our
know
list.
Daryl wants to know where Stevenson
Yeah,
but I've told him.
whip it on us.
It must be
Where's that?
north of Menard.
Here. If you're in Green Bay, go straight north.
We don't go to
an
Wisconsin.
hour and a half. Good cheese.